welcome to the Coaching Uncovered podcast. My name is Brent Davis and I'm the host of the podcast, and this is my podcast where I get to talk to coaches about coaching, and we have got Scotty Williams back again to talk to me today. You keep coming back, Scotty, which is a good thing, so we're obviously talking about some sort of interesting topics for you.
Oh, you just make good coffee, mate. That's why I keep coming back. So that's why I'm here. But no, thank you for inviting me again, mate. Appreciate it.
Well, the joys of COVID, the only podcast that I've done in person is the first one with you. Everything else has been done online. So certainly been
true.
It's been challenging times in 2020 to try and do a podcast in person. But it's certainly been the joys of computers. We can still do this stuff online, which is really cool.
Yep. No, it's been good.
So I thought we would start talking about golf injuries. I thought with your experience in this space, it's something that comes up quite often in golf coaching sessions about golf injuries. So I thought we might come at it from a point of view and throw it open to the people that are tuning in as well to throw to us with some of their golf injuries and problems that they've had in this space. But I thought probably for the first one we should cover off on probably arguably the most common one you see out there with golfers is they get that pain in the lower back. So talk me through some of the causes that golfers would have that cause this pain in their back.
Yeah, so I do, if I was slightly better prepared, I probably could have actually had all the injury stats for you because I do have that table somewhere. But it is definitely in the top two, low back pain for golfers. And it's one of those things that's probably a little bit misunderstood in so much as how violent the golf swing actually is on the body. So there's been two different studies. One showed that it was 6 times. One showed that it was 8 times your body weight in shear force actually through the lumbar spine at impact with driver. And there's been some EMG studies that have shown that the muscles that are trying to support the joints at that time are working at anywhere between 300 up to 600-700% of their what we call MVIC, which is maximal voluntary isometric contraction. So basically they can test manually and work out how hard you can push with a muscle. Then you measure it dynamically and it has to output much, much more than what your sort of perceived maximum is. So anytime you're getting sort of over 150, 200% of your MVIC, the muscle is really sort of maxing out. And obviously what happens sometimes is the muscles aren't quite strong enough to hold those forces. So then the joints transfer in deep and you actually cop a bit of load and you need to rely on your ligaments to actually hold the joint together. Now,
which can't be a good thing.
It doesn't sound very nice, does it? And but you know that's what happens. And as much as the forces that go through the human body might be a bit of a surprise to people, it's probably not that much of a surprise that it can cause low back pain because so many golfers have experienced from time to time at least a stiff lower back the next day from playing golf, if not during or after a round. And probably even more commonly a driving range session, actually, where it's a bit more repetitious.
And probably also at a driving range as well, hitting off synthetic grass off concrete is probably not ideal for stresses going through the body as well.
Because you got that deceleration, you haven't got the ground breaking up and allowing the club head to move through. The deceleration then shoots back up through the shaft and through the body. So it just makes that impact point, which is where most of the load goes back through the body, that a little bit more violent to the body. So, now from a golf coaching point of view, obviously a good golf swing is a lot healthier than a bad golf swing. And it's sort of nice to, so you guys, obviously, the PGA professional can very much play a role in prevention of low back pain just by helping the golfer to swing more efficiently. So one of the things that would happen by doing that, so if we look at some of the biomechanical causes of low back pain, one of the main ones is crunch factor, which you would have heard about. So as you're coming down to impact, side flexing, if I'm a right-hand golfer, I'll side bend to the right and I'll compress all the joints, the facet joints in particular, but the disc cop a bit of a compression there as well. right as the load is going through my body. You can also get it from the sort of reverse C position, which is in that follow-through position, and repetitively doing that over and over again. So these are similar things that happen to fast bowlers, actually, that sort of side flexion with rotation, right as the load is transferring up through your feet and into your body.
And you touch on a great point there. I think it's really important for golf coaches to be get their basic understanding of this type of stuff clear, because if you aren't teaching an effective golf swing, you can cause problems, you can cause injuries. So you need to understand that 3D stuff and understand a bit about how the golf swing should be done, because you can certainly cause injuries to golfers out there. So and certainly encourage golfers to get a bit of a general understanding of 3D golf swings and how it should work.
So yeah, so part of that sort of upskilling yourself, this is for anyone really, but Cabri et al., Cabri, 2009, there was a systematic review on golf injuries. There's actually been multiple systematic reviews done, but that's probably one of the better ones. And there's a nice little diagram that I've sort of appropriated, that shows all the different zones of the body and the phases of the swing that actually loads those areas. So that can be a nice little shortcut, particularly for golf coaches to understand if their client or their player that they're working with is telling them that they're getting sore in that area of their body, that they could sort of instantly go, well, it's probably likely to be this phase of the golf swing, and train their coach's eye straight to that point, and maybe see if they can make some adjustments, which are probably going to result in better performance as well, no doubt.
So, from a physical perspective, if someone came to you with those problems in the back, what type of screening do you do early on to find out if it's a golf swing problem, or it's a physical breakdown, or is there something underlying that's causing those problems for that player?
Yeah, so it'd be probably a three-pronged approach. I would love to see a video of their golf swing. It'd be great if I have coach input on that as well, but my eyes generally good enough now to be able to spot some of these things, particularly for, phones are so good now, you can slow it right down. You can actually see biomechanically what's happening. Not nowhere near as good as 3D, but I mean, it's a pretty good indicator. Obviously questioning your client and asking them, when does it cause the pain? When is it mid-round? Is it on the driving range? Is it afterwards? Is it the next day? When is it that the pain actually shows itself? Because if they're feeling it during the swing, then you can often break it down to which part of the swing, and they can actually tell you the answer to that. And so then that takes me straight to maybe 2 or 3 physical screenings that I'll do. So if it's low back pain, I'd be looking at the musculature and the symmetry of their lower back and seeing if it's overdeveloped on one side, seeing if it's straight, if the spine is straight, and then doing some dynamic range of motion tests, particularly lateral flexion can show how the joints are functioning in the spine. So if you can see that they're a bit blocked one way, if they're blocked one way, so let's say you're standing up tall and you reach down, you can measure it sometimes with how far they can reach down one leg versus the other. But I tend to look more for the actual spine itself when they're doing that test. But as a general way to look, if they can reach further one way, or if they're restricted the other way, that's not going to just automatically improve because you stick a golf club in their hand and they swing it as hard as they can. It's actually going to get worse, and the body's going to have to protect itself somehow. So that's typically what I do, particularly for lower back. One of the other big indicators, so Kerry Evans, so 2005, predictors of low back pain in young elite golfers, which was actually done on trainee golf, PGA trainees. They did a study and they found that having a side bridge, so if you do a side bridge where you get up on one elbow and your hand, you're on your feet doing a full side bridge, if one side is weaker than the other, that was an indicator for back pain, because that asymmetry is not going to allow the spine to move as efficiently as it would like to. And tight hip flexors is another one that's a big one. So doing a Thomas test where you hang one leg off a table, or even just stretching your hip flexors and seeing if they appear to be tight, can be sort of a general sort of easy way to go, or even just making sure that you loosen your hip flexors because it's so common.
It sounds like you found a copy of the screening that I did back when I was trying to play. It sounds like you've found my key problems. But so how common is asymmetry in golfers? So I would have thought golf being a typical one-sided sport. So how common is it to see that imbalances in a golfer's body?
Yeah, so I think it was Izumoto. So it's Japanese researcher, Izumoto. So you can look that up on Google Scholar if you like. He did a good study on professional golfers and showed that compared to non-golfers, there were clear and significant differences in their core musculature in terms of internal oblique on one side more than the other. What were the other ones? I can't quite remember, but there was some specific and obvious adaptations that occurred around the lumbopelvic area in response to the asymmetric forces of the golf swing. So the big question, and this is quite an interesting one, a debate that we used to have, we've pretty much already settled it, but if the listeners aren't privy to it, the question I would put to them is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? So the fact that they've got asymmetry in their core musculature to their sport of choice, is this good or is this bad? So what would your sort of gut feel be?
It could actually help their golf swing from a technical perspective, but it possibly isn't going to be very good for their long-term health.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I would prefer symmetry, but it's one of those things where we work towards symmetry, but we never expect to get there, if that makes sense. So from a strength perspective, we want to try and even it up, but we accept that there's going to be some stronger muscles on the side that's constantly getting used. But when it comes to losing range of motion, so if you're getting let's say an inaccurate firing pattern of muscles and all of a sudden to the point where their side flexion of their lumbar spine is not equal anymore, well, that's actually not a positive adaptation. So that's something that we need to address. So if they're actually moving really well, but they're a bit stronger on one side than the other, it's probably not going to be an issue. But, there's a lot to be said, and the long drive guys are really big on it these days, strengthening that opposite direction. That will actually potentially help your swing, because if you strengthen the muscles that are going to stop your rotation, it's equally as important as the ones that will create rotation. So I tend to try and train them with extra sets the other way, essentially, or left-handed golf swings for the right-handed golfer.
Well, you certainly see that in the super speed protocols when you're training with the speed sticks, they're doing swings both ways when it comes to training in that space. So that's obviously got some scientific support there.
Yeah, I know Clint Rice was big on that one when he was taking me through the super speed stuff, and it's been pretty big in baseball for a long time. I played a lot of baseball, and we always used to swing left-handed and hit left-handed, and I mean it's a nice skill challenge if nothing else, but it certainly unwinds the body and makes it healthier.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's really cool. Okay, so we've covered off on some of the basic causes of that pain. How do we fix it?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to throw it back to the golf coaching initially. I've obviously got what I would do as well, but one of the really good studies that I really liked was and I know I've mentioned this one before, but when they looked at center of mass and center of pressure, and they came up with this measurement called the Angulation Jerk, and essentially what it was how smooth and how balanced professional golfers were compared to club golfers during the golf swing. So it's certainly to the naked eye, it looks that way, doesn't it? It looks smooth. It looks balanced. It looks healthier, because when you fall off balance a little bit and there's unwanted compensatory moves that occur, there's a number of bad things that happen with that don't happen with the professional golfer. Hence why the professional golfer, even though they still get these injuries and pain, but they're copying those injuries at probably 10 to 20 times the training volume that the club golfer will get.
And the speed as well, because they're swinging a lot faster.
Absolutely. So we can, and they're traveling a lot more, and we can probably forgive them for that. So in a sense, their swing is makes their body a lot more resilient, because it is smooth and balanced and nice. So when you're off balance, if you lose that contact with the ground and you don't have a solid connection through the ground, it's going to be really hard to fire the right supportive core muscles that you need to be working when force is going through those joints. And when you consider that it takes probably 0.2 to maybe 0.4 of a second for a muscle to reach its full force of contraction, and you think about the downswing being about 0.25, maybe 0.3 of a second, you already almost don't have enough time to reach full contraction. If those muscles are switching off at some phase during the swing, which will happen if you're not using the ground properly or you're slightly off balance, you just don't have time to fire the support muscles that you need to support the joints when the force comes through the body. So getting that smooth, balanced golf swing is, as it looks, much healthier than one that is, in a sense, if it's off balance, there ends up being some quite fast, jerky movements that are involved, which is forcing certain joints to not be able to be supported in the time that they have, if that makes sense.
So I will take that handball and just that complete palm off to say I can't fix it.
Yes.
It's a coach's job to fix it. So I thought that was pretty ordinary, but that's fine. I will certainly take that handball, and I would enforce that point that it is important to have that technically correct golf swing. That certainly makes a difference, and probably some of the biggest problems I see with golf swing per se is the concepts golfers have in their heads about the things that they have to do, and it's stuff like keeping the lead arm straight, keeping the head down, all that stuff that puts undue strain on a person's golf swing. If they're trying to do that stuff from a golf technique perspective, that just makes it harder and harder on the body to actually try and compensate to do that. If you've got someone that's physically trying to keep their head down on a driver swing that's going through the ball at 100 miles an hour, that can't be good for the body. It just can't work. So it is important to do that that technique based coaching from a golf coach perspective to get that golf swing so it is a more effective motion. But so I've taken that palm off. I've taken that handball, but I am going to throw it back to you now. So, what type of gym work should guys be doing if they have that pain in the back? Is there some general ideas or some general types of training that these golfers should be doing?
Yeah. So where I start to work, I guess, from a physical training perspective, is making sure that they have the correct firing pattern through their core muscles. So do they actually know how to engage them first of all? So do they know what it feels like to engage their deep abdominals, pelvic floor muscles, and knowing that if they're doing their core training, that those deeper muscles need to work first. So for example, if you draw your navel to your spine, you're activating some of your deep core muscles. When you load your core through whatever exercise you're doing, are you able to keep that belly button in, or is it going to pop out? If it pops out, the outer unit still is working, but the inner unit isn't, and you're not getting the benefit that you should be getting. And the more we train this stuff, hopefully it then starts to work during the golf swing when they actually really need it. The second one is to make sure that from the sort of posterior part of the body that our deep lower back muscles, so our multifidus, are firing with our glutes and our hamstrings in the correct order. So if you lie on your tummy and you lift your leg, it should go lower back muscle, glute, hamstring. Quite often you'll find the hamstring works first, then the lower back, and then the glute doesn't actually fire until very late. And that's that late firing of the glute, or not at all, mind you, that's often an issue, and it forces the hamstrings and the lower back muscles to get really tight. So through these sort of misfirings of these important core stabilizer muscles, we end up getting very tight overworking muscles that are having to take up the slack that those other muscles aren't doing, particularly your glutes and your deep abdominal muscles. So we might need to do a bit of direct pressure mobility work on those as well. So good old spiky ball, hard lacrosse balls, foam rollers, things like that really come into vogue as we're trying to rebalance the muscular system and retrain it to fire properly. So that's sort of where we tend to end up doing a bit of work, and it takes maybe a few weeks of training to do that. And then sort of understanding with maybe some basic pivot drills what it feels like to work those muscles when they're actually standing. So I will do pivot drills on a wall, particularly when I've just been doing some of their core training to teach them what it feels like to work those muscles when they're up against the wall. Now, I do have to be a little bit careful that they don't become overly conscious and think that this is how they're going to be thinking when they're standing over the ball on the golf course, because that's a disaster.
Yes.
But certainly, from a physical point of view, sometimes you've got to get them out of pain. So I will actually have that conversation with them as well about, now, this is not the best way to be thinking over the ball. Whatever your coach is telling you to do, work on that. But physically, this is what we need to be seeing.
Spiky balls on tight hamstrings doesn't tickle. Been there, done that back in the day. So
it's lovely.
Again, you've certainly found my screening. I had so many tights on my posterior muscles.
Lots of pluses.
Tight plus was all the way through Ramsey's screening. So that's that certainly plays a role. So you said about firing your glutes there. So Tiger was onto something when he's talking about firing his glutes in the golf swing.
He was. He may have been a few years too late by that point, because I think he's the damage in his spine and his hip joints was probably inhibiting his glutes. So he was actually right saying he can't fire his glutes, but you can get to a point where when you're in active pain, the brain will basically reroute around the area that's got pain. So that's called inhibition. So often with any kind of whether it's an acute niggle, which may not even be that serious, or whether it's an ongoing thing, or you're coming off an injury or surgery, gradually you're going to have to wait for that inhibition to diminish. Otherwise, you can't fire those muscles, and at the very least, there'll be a lag in time before those muscles can fire. So that's why our return to play is, and I'm working with a couple of golfers at the moment that are coming off some pretty decent surgeries, and their back sort of chipping and that sort of thing. And we're going to make sure that they're actually truly ready for those muscles to fire, and support the joints through what can be quite a violent action. Particularly, we want to be able to swing with freedom. We don't want to be, worried about that pinch in the back or pinch in a joint that we feel, because that's a great way to ruin performance out there in the golf. And that's happened to me before, where you just can't you might have the right concept in your head, but you can't even execute that movement because your brain says, look, I don't really care how well you play today. I'm going to protect that joint. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Which is that certainly makes sense. Just slightly off topic. If you're training a golfer, with that core strength to improve that injury prevention, how do you work with that golfer if they can't feel that, if they can't feel the parts that they're supposed to be training?
Yeah, so I've got basically a whole bunch of little tricks, probably similar to a coach would if, you sort of got plan A, didn't work, plan B, plan C, plan D. And I've got my ones that tend to work with most people. So it can really just be a case of them even sitting and clenching their butt cheeks so that they actually rise up a little bit. So you got that feedback of your body weight against the chair. I mean, most people can sort of do that. They can actually squeeze their buttocks while they're sitting on a chair.
I'm doing it now.
There we go. I noticed you got a little bit taller actually in your Skype that we're on at the moment. So that it can be that simple to know what it feels like to clench a muscle. And so using feedback techniques, so putting your hands around your waist and actually feeling your navel draw into your spine so that you become narrower. We can. I've even got some feedback tools that buzz and that sort of thing. If they're doing it properly or they make a tone or a sound, there's been a bunch of things on the market that can help with that. That's probably more your second step, where you've taught them to fire the deep abdominals. So if you're lying on your tummy, for example, and you pick your tummy up off the floor, and you can actually feel, even if you've got a bit of extra pudding there, a bit of extra padding, you can still feel that pressure change by drawing your belly up. So whatever it takes to get that, and feedback is really kinesthetic. Tactile feedback is very important. And typically getting the glutes to work, you get people to dig their thumbs into their glutes and actually feel it working so that they can make that stronger connection between the brain and the muscle. And then obviously the next step is, okay, let's get up into a real position and see whether you can still make that work. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do that. Knee band, putting a knee band on over the top of your knees when you're in standing is a great way to try and get your glutes to fire in standing. So really just a bunch of different tricks for whichever muscle group we're working with, and that's sort of stuff that you need to be able to pull out pretty quickly as an instructor.
Makes sense. Now, this is probably tied into the fixing of the back pain, but if you haven't got any pain at the moment, if you're a healthy golfer, how or how would you prevent getting it in the future? Is there something you can do from a training point of view that will help you stop getting that pain in the future?
Yeah, so typically, like say, if we get our new squad of athletes in at the PGA, I will in the first 2 to 3 months we do lots and lots of bridges with knee bands on, because I'm just assuming that they're going to get some pain at some point because they're stepping up their training volume so much, particularly with their golf practice. Coming into the program, so we just assume that their body, that at least maybe 30% of them at some point are going to have a bit of stiffness and soreness. So, with that in mind, doing our absolute best to try and prevent that, we do lots and lots of bridges, lots of hip flexor stretching, lots of core training, just making sure you get the abdominals to work. I really like doing cable chops, particularly cable chops. So, you've got like a weighted cable and you grab the handle, or you can use a power band, like an elastic band, and getting yourself into a quarter squat, putting your arms out straight and just moving through a very small range of motion, but feeling your abdominals working through that little bit of rotation. So any kind of anti-rotation exercises are great. Um, just understanding how the muscles actually work in the golf swing and that they work sometimes to accelerate, but often to decelerate. And it's a deceleration of motion, which is the absorption of force, which the muscles need to be able to do. So a lot of isometric holds, so sort of holding a position, particularly bridges again, or training the down phase of movement. So if you're squatting or doing a deadlift, training the down phase of the movement to maintain good position. I really like deadlifts, provided they're done obviously with sublime technique and building up gradually. But essentially, particularly if it's a Romanian deadlift, I mean, that is the position that golfers are in. So a lot of that weight training becomes really, really important. But understanding that they can, again, layering up from what you mentioned before, what do you do if the players can't feel it? Well, I tell you what, if you're doing deadlifting and you're not getting sore glutes the next day, something's wrong. If you're getting tight lower back, something's wrong. So often it's how they're feeling during the set, after the set, and then the next day. I'll be sort of assessing that sort of stuff from a training perspective, because just because it might look okay doesn't mean it's actually working as it should. And if you're not working the muscles when you're under load, you're not training yourself for prevention of injury.
Makes sense. So, as a golf coach, I can see a golf swing and think, well, that's going to cause problems down the track.
Yeah.
Just by how they're swinging that golf club, we need to self correct that. We need to get that moving in a much more efficient way. Otherwise, that person's just going to get injured and is going to cause all sorts of problems. Is there something that stands out when you screen a golfer that just screams that that person's going to get injured in the future? Is there anything that just stands out?
Limited left hip rotation's not good. Particularly if we're talking about lower back pain. So if they can't turn their left hip in very well, then the next joint up from that is the lumbar spine. And if you can't use your ball and socket joints in your hips by utilizing your glutes, then you're not going to absorb the force where you need it, and it's going to be the next cab off the rank, which is your lumbar spine. So that's never going to be great. We've got to make sure that the ball and socket joints are really, really good. And then we know that at least they have the ability to absorb that force. Typically, if we see an asymmetry in lumbar spine flexion, I know they're probably already on the way to feeling a bit of discomfort. Because it's due to that overworking of the lumbar spine, the muscles along the lumbar spine, and the inactivity of the abdominals and the glutes. So we know that that's probably going to be an issue. Um, like you, I can look at a golf swing and sort of know where the force is actually going in the body, and then so we can sometimes look at that. Obviously, if players are getting really high hands and a high left shoulder through impact because they're running out of room because they're not pivoting properly, you can pick two or three joints that are potentially going to cop it, whether it's their neck on the left side or whether it's their wrist. But all of that stuff is sort of I don't know. You see that global pattern, work out where the screening fits in and work out what the changes need to be. But it's probably going to be towards a biomechanically efficient golf swing and a healthy, supported body. They're probably what we're going to be, the holy grail that we're going to continue working towards.
Now, I kind of get a sense of where you'll go when I ask you this question, but I'm keen to get it from the expert as opposed to just the golf coach that's spouting it out. how much pain should a golfer be putting up with when they're training? How much is too much pain?
It's all about the quality of the pain. I don't know if you knew I was going to go there or not, but so there is good pain and there's bad pain, and there are quite a lot of people that don't know the difference, and I forgive them for that because everyone's different, and some people their kinesthetic awareness is really high, particularly if they've been brought up doing certain sports or gymnastics or with dance or that kind of thing could really help. So that sort of brain body connection, not everyone's developed it that well, or perhaps they're just sort of not that way minded. But I really do push the point of where is the pain. So if it's in joints or if it's in connective tissue, tendons, ligaments, inside the joint, that's not good pain. So the answer to that is zero. You really should put up with zero of that. You should address that is what you should do. Obviously, if you're Tiger Woods and you're limping around in the US Open
With a broken leg.
with a broken leg, we go, well, we all actually give a pat on the back. I mean, there's a time and place. Don't get me wrong. You've got to be tough. You've got to be resilient in any kind of competitive sport. But in terms of in the training phases, we should be definitely addressing that. But in terms of muscular pain and pain through effort, perceived effort, and that sort of thing in training, well, that's going to be part of the package for sure. I don't want a lot of DOM, so I don't want a lot of delayed onset muscle soreness when I'm training players. It's probably okay in that first couple of weeks of general preparation, but I want their body to become quite familiar with the movements that we do in their training program so that they're not overly sore, because I don't want to be interrupting their skill acquisition too much. And I know that it is possible if the recovery is good and we program them correctly. They should just sort of have that nice sore, if I can use that word. Just that little bit of I can tell I did a workout yesterday, but I kind of feel good for having that. I don't want extreme soreness. There's something not quite right if that's happening. Even if it's positive soreness, that's still not quite right for mine either. What did you think I was going to say?
No, you were exactly on the same path that I was thinking, which is great. And just touch quickly on that soreness through training. We didn't kind of touch on it too much with the periodization podcast, but it's something that will come up in the coaching one, depending which order these podcasts come out, but that could have already come out and we spoke about it. But it's about training through that. And I've always been of the opinion that a good quality trainer should be able to build you a program that will increase the strain and increase your strength without putting too much soreness into the body. Is that a fair point to make? It's
yeah, look, everyone responds differently. You can have a program and you can have, like, people can literally do the same thing. And out of 10 athletes, you're going to have 2 that get really sore, 2 that get a little bit sore, 2 that can just tell, and then 4 that don't feel anything. And it could be how well hydrated they are, how well they sleep, how well they eat, their genetics, their physiology, their training age. It can be so many different reasons, but the general principle is gradualness. We want to have a nice gradual approach. The good thing about getting a little bit of soreness through, let's just say, your glutes or your abdominals, is that you get to make that brain-body connection. Because when you've got a little bit of soreness there, you can actually feel it. And it might be the next training session, it becomes a lot easier to find that muscle group. Or I've even had players who we did some good glute work and they went out in the course and they could actually feel their glutes and they played exceptionally well, to the point where they come back to me and go, "Give me sore glutes, I'm playing tomorrow."
okay.
I honestly, there's a guy who won tour school by doing that. He said, "I've never been able to feel my glute," and we did some good glute work and it worked, and it just happened to be right and he went out and just shot the lights out. I said, "Oh, geez, mate, where'd that performance come from?" He said, "I could find my glutes." And I'm like, "No, come on." He's got, "No, seriously." And then I got confident, and then I was striking it well, and then everything just sort of rolled on from there, because we're able to find his glutes. I mean, that hasn't happened much, but that one stuck in my mind. And I wasn't trying to make him sore because he was about to go play, but actually that worked. So it can work a little bit.
No, that's really cool. I certainly like that. Mate, I think I've covered off all the things that I wanted to cover off on. Was there anything that you wanted to add before we close it off today?
I think there was enough curveballs there, mate. So I think I probably struck
good.
out once or twice, but not too bad.
I would certainly love to hear from people tuning into the podcast on any problems that you're having. So any
Mm.
injuries that they've got out there that I'd be keen to chat about on the podcast. We could certainly give you our 2 cents worth. So you can certainly get in that conversation on social media. So you can find the Coaching Uncovered podcast at Coaching Pod on Twitter. You can also find it by searching Coaching Uncovered on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find the podcast there. And we would love you to join with the Golf Performance Science Facebook group. So you can search that up on Facebook and apply to come in, and you can share the conversation there. So thanks again, Scotty, for coming in. We'll get you back in again real soon, and we'll talk about some more golf injuries. So we'll hear what the golfers out there are having trouble with, and we can
sounds good.
chat about
That'd be good. Good challenge. I like it.
Awesome, mate. Have a great day.
Mate.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Brent.